You wonder why people dismiss you. You sense conversations die when you walk into the room. You notice colleagues bypass you for opportunities you're qualified for. You feel friends treating your opinions as suggestions rather than insights. You do everything right. You're polite, generous, competent, even gifted in your field. But respect slips through your hands like water. The world never explains it to your face, never gives you the direct feedback you need to understand what's happening. But Machiavelli would understand immediately. People sense weaknesses you desperately try to hide. Not your obvious failures, not your lack of knowledge or skill. Those can be redeemed with effort and time. What truly strips you of influence and authority is what you refuse to confront within yourself. The subtle cracks in your psychological armor, always on display for those trained to recognize them. This isn't about major character flaws or moral failings. These are sophisticated psychological patterns that operate below conscious awareness, both yours and others. You might be brilliant in your field, successful by conventional metrics, and well-liked by those who know you. Yet something invisible undermines your authority in crucial moments, causing others to instinctively dismiss your ideas, question your leadership, or simply forget you exist when important decisions are being made. The world is not moved by what you say, or even what you accomplish. It's moved by the signals encoded in your presence, your energy, your unconscious communication patterns. Respect is lost before a word is spoken, determined by subtle cues that others process instantly, but rarely consciously acknowledge. If you recognize these 3 hidden weaknesses, and systematically erase them from your behavioral repertoire, you immediately shift the balance of power in every room you enter. The change isn't gradual or subtle, it's immediate and unmistakable. People who previously overlooked you suddenly pay attention. Colleagues who once interrupted you start listening carefully. Superiors who treated you as dispensable begin viewing you as indispensable. Those who ignore these weaknesses become progressively more invisible, marginalized by their own unconscious patterns until they wonder why their obvious qualifications never translate into real influence. Those who identify and eliminate these patterns become impossible to ignore, commanding attention and respect that seems disproportionate to any visible change in their competence or credentials. The stakes are higher than you might realize. In our hyper-connected, highly competitive world, these subtle signals determine who gets promoted, who gets listened to, who gets included in important conversations, and who gets forgotten when opportunities arise. Understanding and mastering these dynamics isn't optional for anyone seeking real influence. It's the foundation upon which all other skills and accomplishments either build or crumble. People are evolutionarily wired to spot psychological danger and social defection. Within seconds of meeting you, they unconsciously assess whether you're someone who will bend under pressure, disappear when challenges arise, or can't be trusted to hold your position when the stakes get high. This assessment happens faster than conscious thought, processed by ancient survival mechanisms that prioritized accurate threat assessment over politeness or fairness. These assessments become self-fulfilling prophecies. When others sense these hidden weaknesses, they treat you accordingly, with less respect, less trust, less willingness to follow your lead. This treatment reinforces the very patterns that created the problem, creating a downward spiral that's difficult to escape without conscious intervention. The first hidden weakness that destroys respect: unresolved need for validation. This isn't about obvious people-pleasing or desperate attention-seeking behavior. Those patterns are too crude to survive in professional environments. This is about subtle validation seeking that appears reasonable, even thoughtful, but signals fundamental insecurity about your own judgment and worth. The habit of seeking approval through excessive explanation reveals that your psychological center isn't strong enough to hold under scrutiny. When you pepper your statements with, "Do you understand?" or "Does that make sense?" you're unconsciously asking permission for your own thoughts. When you over-explain decisions that should be self-evident, you signal that you don't fully trust your own reasoning. When you look for nods and agreement before proceeding, you broadcast that your confidence depends on external validation. Machiavelli observed this pattern in courtiers who constantly sought their prince's approval before acting. He noted that such behavior immediately disqualified them from real authority because it demonstrated that their decision-making process was fundamentally dependent on others' opinions. Men judge by outcomes, not intentions, he wrote. Those who explain or apologize for every move are never leaders. They become forgotten functionaries whose contributions are overlooked precisely because they seem to doubt their own value. This validation seeking creates a paradox. The more you seek approval for your ideas, the less likely others are to respect them. The more you explain your reasoning, the more others question whether that reasoning is sound. The more you look for agreement, the more others wonder if your position is worth agreeing with. The second weakness, emotional volatility. This doesn't mean occasional emotional expression or passionate advocacy for your beliefs. It refers to unpredictable emotional reactions that signal lack of internal discipline and psychological chaos. When you erupt at perceived slights, engage in gossip as emotional release, or sulk visibly when corrected, you lose respect on a primal, instinctive level. You might think that expressing your emotions freely demonstrates authenticity and helps others understand your perspective. The reality is that emotional volatility signals to others that you cannot be relied upon to maintain composure when stakes are high, that your decision-making may be compromised by emotional reactions, and that interactions with you carry the risk of unpredictable drama. Machiavelli's ideal prince was someone who could disturb others' emotions while never being disturbed himself. He understood that emotional control wasn't about suppressing feelings, but about strategic emotional expression. "It is much safer to be feared than loved," he wrote, "for men are more ready to offend one who is loved than one who is feared." The person who can remain calm while others become agitated automatically assumes a position of superior authority. Emotional volatility destroys respect because it makes you unpredictable in ways that create anxiety for others. People don't know what might trigger an emotional reaction, so they begin avoiding topics, minimizing their interactions with you, or excluding you from sensitive discussions. You become seen as someone who requires emotional management rather than someone capable of managing others. The third and most fatal weakness, leaking your limits. Everyone has limitations, areas of inexperience, knowledge gaps, emotional triggers, resource constraints. The difference between respected and dismissed individuals isn't the presence or absence of limits, but how those limits are handled strategically. When you publicize anxieties, hint at self-doubt, or let uncertainty color your voice and body language, you teach people to see you as smaller than your actual capabilities. You provide a roadmap for others to manipulate or bypass you. You signal that you're not someone who can be relied upon when challenges arise. The world constantly tests boundaries and respects only those who demonstrate self-control and strategic thinking about their own limitations. In business negotiations, relationships, and competitive situations, announcing your weaknesses makes them tools that others can use against you. The person who says, "I'm not good with confrontation," will find themselves confronted more often. The individual who admits, "I tend to doubt myself," will have their ideas questioned more aggressively. Machiavelli didn't advocate for invulnerability. He advocated for strategic presentation of capability. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are, he observed. This isn't about deception. It's about discretion. It's about understanding that your private struggles are resources for building resilience, not badges to collect sympathy or understanding. These three weaknesses are particularly destructive because they often appear in people who are otherwise competent, well-intentioned, and capable. The validation seeker might be genuinely expert in their field. The emotionally volatile person might have passionate commitment to important causes. The limit leaker might be refreshingly honest about human frailty, but these positive qualities become irrelevant when overshadowed by patterns that signal fundamental lack of strategic thinking about social dynamics. Why do these specific weaknesses destroy respect so effectively? Because they expose that you lack one or more of three crucial elements: strategic thinking, emotional discipline, or self-containment. All three telegraph that you are not a force to be reckoned with in the world, but an object to be moved, managed, or bypassed by others with clearer strategic vision. The validation seeker reveals lack of strategic thinking about influence and authority. They don't understand that seeking approval undermines the very thing they're trying to build. The emotionally volatile person shows lack of discipline, suggesting they cannot be trusted with responsibility when pressure increases. The limit leaker demonstrates lack of self-containment, making themselves vulnerable to manipulation and exclusion. Understanding why these patterns develop requires examining the psychological origins of each weakness and how they interact with social dynamics to create cycles of diminishing respect. Most people develop these patterns as adaptations to earlier environments where they served protective or survival functions. But these same patterns become liabilities in competitive adult contexts. The need for validation often originates in childhood environments where approval was conditional on performance, where mistakes were criticized harshly, or where independent thinking was discouraged. The child learns that safety comes from checking with authority figures before acting, from explaining reasoning thoroughly to avoid punishment, from seeking reassurance before making decisions. This adaptation makes sense in environments where you have limited power and where authority figures genuinely have your best interests at heart. But when carried into adult professional and social environments, it signals that you haven't made the psychological transition to peer-level or leadership-level thinking. You're still operating from a subordinate mindset even when your position requires peer or superior positioning. The psychological mechanism behind validation seeking involves what might be called preemptive justification, the belief that if you explain your reasoning thoroughly enough, others won't question your conclusions. This creates a paradox where the attempt to avoid questioning actually invites more scrutiny. When you over-explain, others unconsciously assume there must be problems with your reasoning that require such extensive justification. Emotional volatility often develops as a learned strategy for getting attention, expressing frustration, or attempting to control others' behavior through emotional impact. In some family systems, emotional expression was the primary means of communication, or volatile reactions were rewarded with attention and accommodation. The deeper issue with emotional volatility is that it represents a failure to develop internal emotional regulation systems. Instead of processing emotions privately and then choosing strategic responses, the volatile person uses others as emotional regulation systems, requiring external management of their internal states. This creates an asymmetrical relationship dynamic, where others must invest emotional energy in managing your reactions rather than being able to rely on you to manage emotional challenges independently. Over time, this pattern trains others to avoid bringing you challenging information, exclude you from stressful situations, or minimize their emotional investment in interactions with you. Limit leaking often develops from well-intentioned attempts to be authentic, humble, or relatable. Many people are taught that admitting limitations demonstrates honesty and creates connection with others. In therapeutic or deeply intimate relationships, this might be true. In competitive or professional environments, it becomes a strategic liability. The psychology behind limit leaking involves misunderstanding the difference between appropriate vulnerability and strategic weakness. Appropriate vulnerability involves sharing challenges with carefully chosen individuals who have demonstrated their investment in your success. Strategic weakness involves broadcasting limitations to people who may use that information to their advantage. These patterns become self-reinforcing through what psychologists call behavioral confirmation. When you seek validation, others begin questioning your judgment, which makes you seek more validation. When you react emotionally, others become more careful around you, which feels like rejection and triggers more emotional reactions. When you leak your limits, others test those boundaries, which confirms your fears and leads to more limit leaking. Breaking these cycles requires understanding that respect operates on different principles than approval or sympathy. Respect is earned through demonstrated competence, consistent reliability, and strategic thinking about social dynamics. It cannot be requested, negotiated, or explained into existence. The deepening insight is that these three weaknesses often cluster together, creating compound effects that multiply the damage to your authority and influence. The person who seeks validation often becomes emotionally volatile when that validation isn't forthcoming. The emotionally volatile person often leaks limits by explaining their emotional reactions. The limit leaker often seeks validation for their honesty and becomes emotional when others don't appreciate their authenticity. This clustering effect means that addressing one weakness often requires addressing all three simultaneously. You cannot maintain emotional discipline while constantly seeking validation, because the validation seeking itself creates emotional instability when approval doesn't come. You cannot stop leaking limits while remaining emotionally volatile, because emotional reactions often involve revealing what triggers you. The strategic approach requires understanding that these changes must happen at the identity level, not just the behavioral level. You cannot simply modify your actions while maintaining the same underlying beliefs and self-concept. The validation seeker must develop genuine confidence in their judgment. The emotionally volatile person must build internal regulation systems. The limit leaker must learn strategic thinking about information sharing. This identity-level transformation is why the changes, when they do occur, are so dramatic and immediate. When you stop operating from a subordinate mindset, others immediately sense your shift to peer or leadership positioning. When you develop genuine emotional regulation, others feel safer and more confident in their interactions with you. When you become strategically selective about what you reveal, others begin to respect your boundaries and assume you have good reasons for your discretion. The deepening also involves understanding that respect and likability are different dynamics that sometimes conflict with each other. The validation seeker is often very likable because they make others feel important and valued. The emotionally expressive person may seem authentic and relatable. The limit leaker might appear humble and approachable, but likability without respect leads to being overlooked, marginalized, or taken advantage of. Others may enjoy your company while never considering you for important opportunities. They may appreciate your emotional openness while never trusting you with sensitive responsibilities. They may find your humility refreshing while never viewing you as a potential leader. Machiavelli understood this distinction clearly. He wrote about the difference between being loved and being respected, noting that respect, or fear in his terminology, was more reliable for maintaining authority. Love without respect is vulnerable to changing emotions and circumstances. Respect, once established, creates stable dynamics that don't depend on others' feelings toward you. The integration of these insights requires systematic, deliberate practice to rewire deeply ingrained behavioral patterns. This isn't about surface-level behavior modification, but about fundamental shifts in how you relate to yourself and others in social and professional contexts. The first step involves developing awareness of your validation-seeking patterns. Most people engage in these behaviors unconsciously, not recognizing how frequently they seek approval or reassurance. Begin by tracking specific behaviors. Counting how often you ask, "Does that make sense?" in conversations. Noticing when you over-explain decisions that should be self-evident. Observing when you look for nods or agreement before proceeding with your points. This awareness phase is crucial because validation seeking often masquerades as thoughtfulness, consideration, or thoroughness. You might believe you're being helpful by explaining everything in detail, when actually you're signaling uncertainty about your own judgment. The next step involves developing internal validation systems. Instead of checking with others before acting, develop the habit of checking with your own standards and objectives. Ask yourself, does this align with my goals? Is this consistent with my values? Do I have sufficient information to make this decision? When your internal compass is strong, you need less external confirmation. Practice making statements without seeking immediate feedback. Instead of, "I think we should try this approach," "What do you think?" Try, "I recommend this approach because it addresses our main challenges." Instead of, "Does everyone understand the logic here?" Try, "This strategy builds on our previous success while addressing new market conditions." Develop comfort with others, uncertainty or disagreement without immediately explaining yourself further. When someone looks confused, resist the urge to launch into detailed explanation. Instead, ask, "What specific aspect would be helpful to clarify?" This puts the responsibility on them to articulate their needs, rather than you anticipating and addressing every possible concern. Learn to end statements definitively rather than trailing off into explanation or justification. Practice concluding your points with periods, not question marks. We'll implement this change next quarter, rather than, we'll implement this change next quarter, assuming everyone agrees that makes sense given our timeline and resources. Emotional mastery begins with developing awareness of your emotional triggers and early warning signs. Most emotional volatility can be prevented through early intervention, before physiological arousal reaches levels that compromise judgment and behavior. Identify your specific triggers, certain types of criticism, particular people, specific situations, time pressures, or interpersonal dynamics that predictably lead to emotional reactions. Understanding your patterns allows you to prepare strategies for managing these situations differently. Develop a repertoire of immediate intervention techniques. Deep breathing interrupts the physiological escalation of emotional arousal. Physical movement dissipates stress hormones. Mental refocusing techniques redirect attention away from triggering thoughts. Temporal shifting, imagining how you'll view this situation in a week or month, provides perspective that reduces emotional intensity. Practice strategic emotional expression rather than emotional suppression or emotional explosion. This means choosing when, how, and to whom you express emotions based on strategic considerations rather than immediate feelings. Sometimes controlled expression of concern or disappointment serves specific purposes. The key is conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. Learn to pause between emotional stimulus and response. Even a 5-second delay can mean the difference between a strategic response and an emotional reaction. During this pause, ask yourself, what outcome do I want from this interaction? How can I respond in a way that serves my longer-term objectives? What would the most respected person in this situation do? Develop the ability to remain calm while others become emotional. This positions you as the stable center around which more volatile people orbit. When others are upset, your composure becomes a reference point that others appreciate and respect. Strategic limit management begins with understanding the difference between acknowledging limitations privately and broadcasting them publicly. Everyone has areas for growth and development. The question is, how you handle these limitations strategically. Develop internal honesty about your actual capability, gaining external confidence about your ability to handle challenges. This isn't about lying or misrepresentation. It's about focusing on what you can do rather than what you cannot do. When asked about areas outside your expertise, learn to redirect rather than confess limitations. Instead of, I'm not good with financial analysis, try, let me connect you with our financial specialist who can give you the detailed analysis you need. This demonstrates resourcefulness rather than incompetence. Practice strategic ambiguity about your capabilities. When someone asks if you can handle a challenging assignment, I'll make sure it gets done properly, is better than, I've never done anything like this before, but I'll try my best. The first response focuses on outcomes. The second focuses on limitations. Build genuine competence in your areas of limitation, rather than simply managing them strategically. The goal isn't to hide weaknesses permanently, but to develop strengths that make those weaknesses less relevant. If you're weak in public speaking, invest in developing that skill, rather than avoiding speaking opportunities. Learn to frame limitations as boundaries rather than incapabilities. I focus on strategic planning rather than operational details. Sounds more authoritative than, I'm not good with details. I prefer to handle this through the proper channels, is better than, I don't know how to deal with this situation. The integration process requires practicing these changes in low-stakes situations before applying them in high-stakes contexts. Begin with casual conversations, routine interactions, and situations where mistakes won't have serious consequences. Create feedback loops to monitor your progress. Ask trusted colleagues or friends to observe your communication patterns and point out when you fall back into old habits. Record yourself in practice situations to identify patterns you might not notice in real time. Develop replacement behaviors for each weakness pattern. Instead of seeking validation, practice making clear statements and moving forward. Instead of emotional reactions, practice strategic pauses and considered responses. Instead of leaking limits, practice focusing on capabilities and outcomes. Set specific goals for behavior change. This week I will not ask, "Does that make sense?" more than twice in any conversation. This month, I will pause for 5 seconds before responding to any criticism. This quarter, I will focus all discussions of my capabilities on what I can deliver rather than what I'm learning. Modify your environment to support these changes. Surround yourself with people who model the behaviors you want to develop. Reduce exposure to situations that trigger your old patterns, building new ones. Seek out contexts where strong boundaries and emotional regulation are valued and rewarded. Avoid environments that encourage validation, emotional volatility, or excessive vulnerability until you've strengthened your practice in progressively challenging. Start with friendly audiences and low-stakes conversations.
Gradually work up to more challenging interactions, difficult colleagues, high-pressure situations, conflicts, and negotiations. The advanced application of these principles involves not just eliminating weaknesses, but actively building patterns that command respect and authority. This requires understanding how the absence of these weaknesses creates space for positive qualities to emerge and be recognized. When you eliminate validation seeking,
you create space for genuine leadership presence. Others begin to see you as someone who trusts their own judgment, which makes them more likely to trust your judgment as well. Your statements carry more weight because they're not diluted by constant seeking of approval or over-explanation. Advanced practitioners learn to use strategic silence where others would seek validation. Instead of asking, "What do you think?" after presenting an idea, learn to present your recommendation and wait. The silence allows others to process your suggestion without feeling pressured to provide immediate validation. Often, this results in more thoughtful consideration and stronger buy-in when agreement does come. Develop the ability to make decisions without extensive consultation while still gathering necessary information. This involves learning to distinguish between decisions that require input and decisions that require only information. Many validation seekers consult others about decisions that should be made independently, which signals lack of confidence in their own judgment. When you master emotional regulation, you become someone others turn to during crises. Your ability to remain calm when others are stressed makes you a natural center of stability. This positions you for leadership roles and important responsibilities because others trust your judgment under pressure. Advanced emotional regulation involves learning to influence others' emotional states through your own composure. When you remain calm during conflicts, you can actually de-escalate situations and guide others toward more rational responses. This is a leadership skill that becomes increasingly valuable as you advance in your career. Master practitioners learn to use strategic emotional expression for specific purposes. They might express controlled concern to motivate action, measured enthusiasm to build support, or calibrated disappointment to correct behavior. The key is that these expressions are chosen tools rather than automatic reactions. When you stop leaking limits, you create mystique and authority that draws others toward you. People become curious about your capabilities rather than certain about your limitations. This curiosity works in your favor during negotiations, job interviews, and relationship building. Advanced limit management involves learning to probe others' limitations while protecting your own. This creates information asymmetry that provides strategic advantages in competitive situations. You learn more about others' constraints while they learn less about yours. Develop the ability to take on challenges that stretch your capabilities without broadcasting uncertainty about your ability to succeed. This involves private preparation and skill development, combined with public confidence about outcomes. Others see someone who consistently delivers results even in challenging situations. The highest level of application involves using these principles to build what might be called effortless authority, the kind of presence that commands respect without apparent effort. This happens when elimination of weaknesses allows your genuine strengths and capabilities to shine through without distraction. People with effortless authority don't need to demand respect or work hard to maintain it. Their consistent demonstration of strategic thinking, emotional regulation, and capability creates a reputation that precedes them into new situations. Others assume they're competent and trustworthy until proven otherwise, rather than requiring them to prove themselves repeatedly. Advanced practitioners also learn to help others eliminate these same weakness patterns, which multiplies their influence and builds loyalty. When you help someone stop seeking validation, regulate their emotions better, or protect their limitations strategically, you become a trusted advisor and mentor. The mastery level involves understanding how these principles apply differently across various contexts and cultures. What demonstrates authority in one setting might appear arrogant in another. What shows appropriate emotional regulation in one culture might seem cold in another. Advanced practitioners develop sensitivity to these variations while maintaining their core principles. Let this fundamental truth sink in. No one respects uncontrolled disclosure of insecurity, erratic emotional responses, or public displays of limitation and doubt. They may be polite about these patterns. They may even find them temporarily endearing, but they will never follow where you lead, never trust you with their most important challenges, never view you as someone capable of handling serious responsibilities. The transformation from these hidden weaknesses to genuine authority is choosing sovereignty over transparency. It's developing such internal resolution and strategic thinking that you become a mystery worth solving, rather than an open book that's quickly read and forgotten. You become predictable only in your results and your reliability, never in your emotions, never in your doubts, never in your need for external validation. Your systematic challenge begins immediately. Over the next 30 days, eliminate these 3 weakness patterns with the same intensity you would apply to any other serious threat to your success and influence. Track your validation-seeking behaviors and replace them with confident statements followed by strategic silence. Monitor your emotional reactions and develop intervention strategies that maintain your composure under pressure. Notice when you leak limitations and practice focusing conversations on your capabilities and intended outcomes. Start with small, safe situations where the stakes are low and the consequences of change are minimal. Practice new patterns with strangers, casual acquaintances, and routine professional interactions before applying them in high-stakes situations with important relationships or critical decisions. As you implement these changes, you'll notice several immediate effects. Conversations become more efficient because you're not seeking constant validation. Conflicts de-escalate more quickly because you're not adding emotional volatility to already charged situations. Others begin seeking your opinion more frequently because they perceive you as someone with clear judgment and stable presence. More importantly, you'll experience internal changes that compound over time. Increased confidence in your own decision-making as you stop depending on external validation. Greater emotional resilience as you develop better regulation systems. Enhanced strategic thinking as you become more conscious about what information you share and why. The people who command genuine respect in every field, successful executives, influential leaders, respected experts, all share these characteristics. They don't seek validation for their expertise. They maintain emotional regulation under pressure, and they share information strategically rather than transparently. These aren't personality traits or genetic gifts. They're learned skills that anyone can develop through deliberate practice. If you want to build lasting respect and unshakable authority, you must erase these 3 hidden weaknesses from your behavioral repertoire. The alternative is remaining trapped in patterns that guarantee continued marginalization, regardless of your actual competence or potential contributions. Remember that respect cannot be requested, negotiated, or explained into existence. It can only be earned through consistent demonstration of strategic thinking, emotional discipline, and genuine capability. When you eliminate the patterns that signal weakness, you create space for your actual strengths to be recognized and valued. The world is waiting for you to claim the authority you deserve, but it will never hand that authority to someone who signals through their behavior that they cannot handle it responsibly. Eliminate these weaknesses, and watch how quickly others begin treating you as someone whose opinions matter, whose leadership can be trusted, and whose presence adds value to any situation. Your transformation starts now with your next interaction. Your next opportunity to demonstrate strategic thinking instead of validation seeking, emotional regulation instead of volatility, and confident capability instead of limit leaking. Transform these hidden weaknesses and discover that silence becomes your advantage, discipline becomes your weapon, and unshakable composure becomes your throne. This is how authentic authority is built, not through demanding respect, but through eliminating the patterns that make respect impossible to maintain. Your move. The choice is yours, but the time for choosing is now.